Okay, I'm going to call the Human Affairs Committee to order on September 18th, 2017 at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Yes, Alderman at Large Lori Wilshire.
Here.
Alderman June Karen. Here. Alderwoman Marianne Melisi Goli, I'm present. Alderman Tom Lopez.
I'm here.
And Alderman Don LeBrun.
Here.
Everyone is here. We have a quorum. And also in attendance, we have Carrie Skana from Urban Programs and Director Marchant from Community Development.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Public comment. Addison? No? Anybody? No? Okay. No public comment this evening. Communications.
We have none.
Unfinished business.
We have none.
New business resolutions.
We have none.
New business ordinances.
We have 017044, revisions to the Citizens Advisory Commission for Community Grants.
For the
And
sake of discussion,
I would make a motion to recommend final passage.
motion is before us is to recommend final passage. Carrie and Sarah, would you care to join us for the discussion, please? Thank you. So just a preface from my point of view, review and comment is something that was set up, I believe, back in the 80s with a big volunteer contingent and, a 5-member commission. So over the last maybe 10 years, there have been a lot of changes, nothing as concrete as I think this might make it. I think this revisions that are proposed here fall more in line with what the other commissions in the city do. And I think it makes more sense to go this route at this point. But I'd like to open it up to anyone else who might have some, if you want to talk about it, or anyone on the commission. Alderman Karen.
Before Carrie and Sarah talk about this, I've been sitting on this as the liaison for the last 6 years, and for the last 3 or 4, we have not had any real rules or regulations. We never had minutes, we never had any concrete person to talk to. It was always someone working within the mayor's office, so every time that position got changed, someone else knew, and we were trying to put things together. So when Mayor Dodges came in, we asked him if we could do this within a department. And so that someone who worked here was the liaison to that commission. And he was kind enough to do that and work with Director Marchant, and Carrie, who also does urban programs and the other grants, has been our go-to person. And it really has helped the 5 commissioners who have done this, along with working with the volunteers. So I think it's a great idea, and I'd like to hear more from Director Marchant and Carrie.
Floor is open.
Okay. Thank you for having us here this evening. Do you want to? Did you want an overview? Do you just have questions, or how would we?
Overview.
No. Do you
How
want
about an overview? Just
Sure. Yeah.
You want me to take?
Sure.
Is there like a head table set up somewhere?
So to add to what was already said, my involvement began about 2 cycles ago with the group that used to be called Review and Comment. Last year it was changed to the Citizens Advisory Commission for Community Grants. We call it the CAC for short, because that's a pretty long title. And as Alderman Karen said, it's been difficult because there hasn't been a lot of formality to the group. So we've been working through that and doing it through the application process and through the meetings. And just to clarify, we do take minutes now, and they're all posted like they're supposed to be. And so what we've learned and what we've heard from the commissioners in the group is this ordinance reflects some of the issues that they've been facing over the last several years. And again, my involvement's only been a couple. It sounds like it's been going back a number of years prior to that. And we were looking to try to streamline the composition of the commission to match what other city boards have and the number of people, and still reflect that community input and still have it be a volunteer commission with a range of opinions who can weigh on these funds. And in case those who aren't familiar with it, this group oversees funding applications from human service agencies, and it rates and recommends funding to those agencies with a combination of primarily city funds, but also a small amount of CDBG funds that we're allowed to spend on that as well. So this group comes together, they review these applications. The former structure had it be 5 commissioners, and amongst those commissioners, they would then go out annually and recruit 5 to 6 volunteers to be kind of in their hub. And then each of those 5 groups would, and this has ranged, I guess, over the years, but the way it's been recently is they would get a certain number of applications, review those applications, make a funding recommendation. The chair of the commission would normally tell that each individual group how much money they had to dole out. So one of the issues is that it was becoming very difficult to recruit that large number of volunteers each year. The commissioners are appointed, but annually the volunteers would range. Some would come back, some wouldn't, and you're talking anywhere from 25 to 30 people that had to be recruited each year. Administratively, we would have to receive an application from those volunteers, ensure that there weren't conflicts of interest, and go through that whole process, verify that they were Nashua residents. So it was very time-consuming for that number of people to do that each year. So the intent of this is to put it down to a 7-member commission, and we've worked with the existing commissioners and both Alderman Karen and Alderman Wilshire to really hear some of their concerns and try to make sure that it's fair the way the commissioners are appointed. One of the recommendations was that the Board of Aldermen be able to appoint some of those in addition to the mayor so that it wasn't all just mayoral appointments. So that ordinance reflects that. And then the other part, one of the common issues that we heard was that as they're reviewing applications, each group was doing that kind of in a silo. So each of the 5 commissioners, when they broke off to review their assigned applications, were sort of doing that in a vacuum and not necessarily looking at the whole big picture to be able to say, well, among my 5 or 6 applications, these are the ones I rank the highest, but how does that compare to the group as a whole? So that was one of the other concerns, and we think that this structure would address that because the new 7-member commission would view all applications. We'd advise implementing written policies and procedures, which eventually would be the next step, and also a scoring system to help that process along and rate those applications fairly. And I think, so that's pretty much the high points, I think, and as far as other tweaks, more just administrative. I don't know if Director Marchant has anything to add?
I'll just say that Carrie did a tremendous amount of research reaching out to her colleagues across the country of how people set up these committees and how other people do it, because many, many, many communities across the country have this. And our process seemed very unique when she talked to them. And so this is a model of trying to pull some of the best from what she's learned across the country of how we can do this and to streamline the process. It's a short time frame commitment, but it's a pretty major commitment from the volunteers who are on these committees. And they put a lot of work and effort into it. And if we can help them streamline this process, make sure that it's even clear scoring criteria, so when they are questioned, as you always are, about why this one scored higher than this one, you can explain the criteria, level the playing field, and so hopefully move this forward a little bit cleaner. So that's the goal in this.
There were a couple things that really stood out to me as major in this process. One of them was having a low-income representative. So, whether it's someone who works with low-income people or a low-income person themselves involved in the process. I thought that was a really good idea. And the other thing, I think stabilizing this process, because it changes every time we have a new mayor, right? So I think having the Community Development Division involved stabilizes the process for the city. And I think those are, for me, two of the big win tickets. Alderman Lopez.
Wasn't that part taken out? It looks like they crossed out the line where it said that you'd provide administrative support to the committee.
It's the last line of the legislation.
Was that specifically done, or was it just you took out the old model and implemented a new one?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's the removal of, and so at the very end of the new text, it is clarifying that urban programs will provide administrative assistance.
I think that's very helpful. I think it stabilizes the process. It doesn't change the process every time you have a new mayor in the corner office. I think it really will help the process move along much more smoothly. Alderman Lopez.
I just have some concern because, number one, I remember earlier this year the mayor was attempting to get funding because he had a large group of mayor's engagement committee or some. It was a group of people that were coming out of the Nashua class, the leadership thing that they were doing upstairs, and the reasoning that we were given was if we give them a budget, they'll be more likely to be involved and engaged in the community because now they actually have some decision-making power. So this was an alternate way for people to have decision-making power and talk about be involved in the choices as to what low-income scenarios or charitable causes the city was going to plan to support. So if we had so many volunteers that we needed to get engaged and use a mechanism to engage them, such as having them help in the governance decision-making process, it feels like not only did we not fund that particular plan, but also we're taking away something that has historically worked well, but is in recent years harder to actually fill seats for. So part of me doesn't like the fact that we're just streamlining it because it's hard to find 20 people to make decisions about the charitable organizations in our city. And we're replacing it with 7 people that are, appointees by the mayor, appointees by the president of the Board of Aldermen with confirmation by the Board of Aldermen. And particularly, just don't like seeing that the representative of a low-income neighborhood or a low-income resident could also just be, you can replace somebody who's an actual low-income resident with somebody representing low-income residents on behalf of a neighborhood organization. Like, I feel like this administration, I'm pretty certain, is not going to misuse that, but there's a lot of organizations that claim to represent low-income, populations, and it just makes me nervous being able to replace having an actual person who's going through the struggle and having difficulty and knows the neighborhoods with somebody who might commute in from elsewhere and just be doing a job.
Well, we can certainly entertain any kind of amendment you might like to make to that provision, Alderman Lopez. I'd be happy to entertain any kind of input on that. Carrie.
Just to speak to that point regarding the low-income representation, that actually came out of, or the idea anyway, came out of our home regulations, where we deal with what we call community housing development organizations, or CHODOs. And part of qualifying as a CHODO is that you have low-income representation on their board. And the regs go in to define what qualifies as a person being that low-income representative, which, again, is either being low-income themselves, living in a low-income neighborhood, or being representative of a low-income group. But the intent is really to have that almost be an appointed person. And the essence of it is, and it's not as clear in this, but it is in the federal regulations, is that it's, if you have a grassroots neighborhood group, or even an offshoot of a church or something like that's their purpose, is to represent that low-income area, that they could then vote and appoint somebody to be their representative. I don't think it's so much to mean that anybody who works at an agency that happens to deal with a low-income population would necessarily fill that role. In reading some of the guidance that they have, and I know when I go through and qualify agencies as CHODOs, we have to look very carefully at who they're claiming to be their low-income representatives on their boards. So we could have a similar process.
Alderman Lopez and then Alderman LeBrun.
So I have no concerns about, again, this administration or these department heads, but I do know it's easier to recruit a token than the actual person who's involved in it. This process looks very similar to the one that the Continuum of Care uses when it's doing its HUD rankings, because HUD basically put the Continuum of Cares as regional organizations in charge of ranking which organizations and programs it would then cut, so that HUD wouldn't have to be the one who said, hey, I'm going to defund the soup kitchen. I'm just going to have all of the organizations self-rank, self-organize, and then based on that ranking, we can make that decision. One of the things I like about that process, though, is that there is still that opportunity for someone who's a low-income resident to come in and represent and speak at the Continuum of Care meetings, be involved in the process, and I feel more comfortable doing that. Now, I'm saying this as somebody who constantly works for organizations that represent low-income, people. So I'm not even saying that any of the organizations in the neighborhood are necessarily untrustworthy. I just think, why not just make sure we reserve a place for someone who's going through the struggle themselves, rather than somebody who is professing to be an expert on it or a professional respondent to it, I guess.
So are you looking to amend it to do that, Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, I would just like to amend that section where it says, the appointed low-income member may be a resident of low-income neighborhoods or be a low-income resident. I think all of the other ones, the next two choices for the public are, or be an elected representative of a low-income neighborhood organization, as further described in the guidance. We could do that, but I feel like that leaves the door a little too wide open. Why not have at least one person who's part of the situation?
Alderman LeBrun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a little bit of a problem with the way the appointees would be appointed. That is, I have a problem when the mayor and the president of the Aldermanic Council would be appointing individuals. I see it becoming a political football. I just feel that there's got to be a better process for getting appointees.
Any ideas on how we could do that? Because this is how most boards and commissions are appointed
I
in the city.
understand that, but it also becomes a political football in that you've got a president of the Aldermanic Council and you've got the mayor picking and choosing their particular people. And I see, in the mayor's case, I see him choosing people who are basically liberal. I see the president of the Aldermanic Council picking liberal individuals. And I think you need a cross-reference of liberals and conservatives.
Well, that's why it comes back before the Board of Aldermen to approve those people. I mean, that's no different than any other board or commission in this city, Alderman LeBrun.
I understand that.
Okay.
But you have an Aldermanic Council that is has a majority of liberals. You have a liberal mayor. I see a commission like this being made up of all liberals.
Well, that doesn't mean to say that in January that won't all change, except for the mayor, right? This board could
That's true.
change. Yeah.
That's true.
Alderman Lopez.
And
Oh, sorry.
it could be either way. If it was a conservative administration, it could work either way.
Right. Alderman Lopez.
Just, before we get caught up in the L's and the C's, would it be an idea for all applicants who are interested in becoming a appointee of the Board of Aldermen, that their resumes be forwarded to this board as a matter of course, and then the board make the decision rather than appointee and then confirmation? Because that way there'd be transparency. If people are interested in joining this committee, then at least for I don't think we should necessarily take away the mayor's autonomy in this, because there's no point in having an executive branch if we're trying to micromanage it. But for the appointees that would be appointed by at the moment, the president, it seems like, and I know you have a lot more experience on the board, that seems more like a traditional kind of thing, because it shouldn't be the Ward 4 alderman gets one, the Ward 6 alderman gets one. It should be a central person that's identifiable, takes responsibility for taking those applications, reviewing them, and then giving them to the aldermanic assistant to be confirmed. Instead of necessarily putting that on just the president, couldn't we use that as a role that this board does, like just take all the applicants?
Are you talking about this board or this committee?
This committee. The ones that are identified here, and I guess I should probably be asking our city staff here too. Would it become too cumbersome if we just said that members of the Citizens Advisory Committee who are to be appointed by the Board of Aldermen, the process for that would be just to submit your application to this committee?
I don't, so for example, the process I know well is the mayor's process. And through that process, you submit a resume. That resume is sent to you as part of the confirmation process, and you confirm it. I don't think it's unreasonable at all to ask for a resume of somebody who was being appointed by the alderman as well. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I don't think it would be administratively burdensome.
So sorry.
Alderman Lopez.
So my thought is just that as long as the board or this committee particularly is aware that an application is being made, then there isn't going to be that, well, I can never get appointed because I'm not friends with the president, or I'm not of the right political persuasion, because it's becoming public record that at least you initiated the process when it was available.
So I guess my concern would be that the person that would be appointed by the board president would be vetted through this committee, and the people that would be appointed by the mayor would be vetted through the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee. I don't know about that.
It does
Alderman
seem
Karen.
awkward.
Okay, I'm a little, I understand Alderman Lopez's concern, but right now, the mayor appoints the 5 commission, other than myself, because I'm a member of the Human Affairs Committee, he appoints the commissioners. They have to submit an application, and it goes to personnel. I don't think any application should come to us. And even if the board president appoints someone, that person still needs to be vetted anyway through the personnel.
Right.
You know, so I think the process is already in place. I can understand your concern. You know, when we talked about this, one of the issues that I had and some of the other commissioners was the volunteers that came out were people, everyday people. They weren't people on other committees. They weren't members of different boards. They came out and vetted all the agencies. If they had a conflict, like my conflict was because I sit on the board for the senior center. So I would ever get that agency's request. So I don't think it would change, because you're still looking for people to be commissioners that are looking to do the due diligence for the citizens of the city and for the agency as a whole. So I don't think we should be, if we're vetting applications, it should go through personnel and not through, you know, and then we can make our yays or nays. I think it's important that anyone, you know, the mayor or the board of the president should be asking them to turn in a resume. And trust me, people aren't knocking the door down to be a member of this commission, even though it's a small, you know, it's 3 months, but it's an intense 3 months of time. So, you know, we're always happy to have people come forward, but it doesn't always work that way.
I too, I think the process of it going to the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee seems like the right way to go with this, because they're already vetting the mayor's appointees. And they're aldermen. So, you know, I think you have your chance at the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee to sit in on that committee when someone is being vetted through that process. And then again, you get to vote on them on their appointment at the full board. So I agree with Alderman Karen. I think it should stay in the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Committee. Alderman Lopez.
That part I agree with too, because I was looking at there's one aldermanic member who is on the Human Affairs Committee, this one. And then 2 members shall be appointed by the president of the Board of Aldermen and confirmed by the Board of Aldermen. And then 4 appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the Board of Aldermen. So I'm assuming that the 4 that the mayor is appointing and the 2 that the president are appointing are going to go through personnel administrative affairs anyway.
Correct.
And I wasn't necessarily trying to create another hoop for whatever poor volunteers have to go through all this. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any semblance of concern that, I put my resume in, but I wasn't nominated by somebody because I wasn't favored by them.
Well, I think that can happen on any board or commission, anyone, and we have a number of boards and commissions here in the city that I think I agree with Alderman Karen, that people aren't banging down the doors to do that. I mean, we certainly have a great number of volunteers in the city on all of our boards, but I think this one is like a short time frame, like a 3-month crash course in getting these, applications vetted and recommendations back to the board, so. Alderman Lopez.
I think if anybody in the future feels like that they wanted to be on this committee very passionately and aren't being heard, they could probably also just contact the committee and ask for a letter to be put on record or something along those lines. So I guess I'm not really overly worried about that. It's just a scenario that could maybe someday happen. But I would like to make the amendment that a person either living in a low-income neighborhood or being a low-income resident themselves should be a representative on the board, and just remove the representing an organization part.
Do you have that, Madam Clerk?
Yes, so the appointed low-income member may be a resident of, and it should be a low-income neighborhood or be a low-income resident, period.
Is that your intent, Alderman Lopez?
That's my intent. I appreciate the guidance that HUD gives sometimes, but I also think sometimes they're a little bit more wordy than they need to be.
Further discussion?
Madam Chair?
Alderman LeBrun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To say that a person should be a member of a low-income neighborhood would be discriminating against the other 8 wards.
I don't know how I feel about that. What do you think?
A low-income person can live in any
Any
ward.
ward. No, that's true. I agree. A low-income person can live in any ward.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we should just keep it with the income.
Carrie, do you have any feedback on that?
Sure.
We look to you for
I know.
advice. Well, again, the language came from some existing regulations and guidance, and I think the intent being that so there may be the case where somebody lives in a low-income neighborhood, although they themselves might not be low-income, but they're living right in the heart of that neighborhood, and they're seeing the issues firsthand, and they're living it firsthand, as Alderman Lopez said. And then the other situation is, more to Alderman LeBrun's point, is that an individual themselves or their household might be low-income, although they could live anywhere in the city. So it's kind of giving the option either way for that role to be filled.
So how do we determine that? How do we determine, for the purpose of having that appointee, how do we determine that qualification?
Right. Well, low-income neighborhood is address, which is easy. And being a low-income person, they would either have to provide some type of income backup or a self-certification form. And that's typically what we do for our other programs.
You do that already?
For other HUD programs, yeah.
Okay. Alderman Lopez?
What is the definition of low income?
Less than 80% of area median income, which is
Do you happen to know at the
a
top of
HUD
your head?
standard. So for a family of 4, it's about 50,000 annual income. Those are
Just thought I would
roughly,
take the opportunity to point out to the public how many of us are much closer to low income than we think we are.
right. That is quite true.
I think we are also concerned if we just limited it to a low-income resident in the ability to find somebody to fill this role. And so having somebody in the neighborhood as well, having some diversity of options in recruiting this person is important, because many people who are low income have jobs of different hours and different times, and this is a very intense time commitment for 3 months. And so we want to make sure we can find a good recruit as well.
Alderman Malizia Goya.
Yeah, Alderman Lopez, to Alderman LeBrun's point, maybe we could amended to read, or be a low-income resident of the city, or residing in the city of Nashua, because
Not necessarily the city.
yeah, of Nashua, yeah.
I agree with that. I wanted to leave the choice because it occurred to me in the discussion that if we made it just a low-income person, so that we didn't discriminate against the neighborhood, or we said it has to be a person in a low-income neighborhood, doing either one of those, that discriminates more than anything else, because then you're the guy who's on there because you have a low income. That singles you out to everyone else in the committee. So having the choice lets you kind of define why you're there exactly. I mean, it's a little bit less stigmatizing, I think. So I like the wording proposed by Alderman Malizi Goya.
So I will, the amendment will be the appointed low-income member may be a resident of a low-income neighborhood or be a low-income resident of Nashua.
I disagree with the low-income neighborhood. That's totally discriminatory.
No, I don't see that as discriminatory. Why do you feel it's discriminatory? It could be a low-income neighborhood, or it could be a low-income resident that lives anywhere.
No, not with the way she's reading it. There's no need to state that a low-income neighborhood.
Does that come right out of the HUD definitions?
The-
Carrie, I was just asking
sorry, it
Carrie
does.
if she could reply to. It does?
It does.
Hmm.
The original wording actually, with including the representative of low-income populations.
I think if I may, I think I understand what you're saying, Alderman LeBrun. So putting of Nashua at the end, you're interpreting it as impacting the meaning of that?
When you say of the city to start with, you're denoting the city, the interior of the city. You're
Yeah.
not denoting Nashua as a whole.
Oh, when I'm saying city with an uppercase C, meaning the city of Nashua from end to end. So all of the wards, not the inner city neighborhoods. I'm thinking from, the northern part of Ward 3 to the southern part of Ward 8.
Okay, you're saying that's what you mean.
Well, I
But-
think.
But you have to clarify it in words. You can't just say, this is what I mean. You have to clarify it in words.
And that's why I'm saying city with an uppercase C, or city of Nashua, which would denote the host city.
Okay, we'll see what it looks like when it's written up.
Okay. Carrie, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that elsewhere in the ordinance, it requires that all of these appointed commissioners be residents within the city of Nashua. So it's, I mean, I know it helps to clarify in this particular paragraph, but it is a standard across the board that they all have to reside in Nashua to begin with.
Meaning any of the wards in the city, not just in the inner areas of the city.
Right.
Would you feel better, Alderman LeBrun, if we took out the word neighborhood?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I
Okay.
started out by
Okay,
saying.
all right, so if we just say the appointed low-income member may be a resident of the city of Nashua, and just leave the rest of it out,
That's fine.
how does the committee feel about that?
The appointed low-income member.
What, a low-income area within the city of Nashua? I mean, does that,
It's the same thing as neighborhood to me.
Yeah.
It's the same. Alderman Lopez.
I think it would just read, the appointed low-income member may be a low-income resident of the city of Nashua.
It shouldn't say maybe then.
No.
I'm sorry.
Shall be.
Shall be.
Shall be.
Yes, if it's a low-income member, shall be a low-income resident.
Probably
You don't even
leave-
have to say it twice.
Right.
But we should leave a reference as to what defines low income, because if we were taking out as further described in guidance, then it might get very confusing. Can we leave that section in so that at least we use the HUD definition of low income?
I'd be okay with that.
Maybe
Right.
just a reference to
To the
as defined by HUD.
qualifications of low income,
Yep, as defined by HUD.
right?
As defined by HUD.
Yeah. Alderwoman Melissa
I
Goya.
just have a question for Director Marchant. Does this get us back into a situation, though, where we may have problems finding someone to fill this seat?
This limits us to only low-income residents. It does not allow for does not give the allowance for somebody who may not be low income, but who lives in the heart of a low-income neighborhood. That's what this modification would do.
Alderman Lopez.
I would like to assure everybody, we have not solved poor. Like, we won't run out of people who are low-income qualifiers. It's
We
just
have
gonna be a
not
matter
solved
of
poor.
engaging. Yeah, like, there are many people in Nashua who are low-income. I'm sure we can find one. Virtually anybody who's in veterans housing or on a fixed income program doesn't meet income guidelines for I mean, it meets the definition. So I really don't think we're gonna have an issue.
Okay, so the appointed low-income member shall be a resident of the city of Nashua, period.
It has to say low income.
A
A
Otherwise,
low
low income
Get rid of the first low income.
Okay,
Don't
resident.
have to say it twice.
right.
Okay, the appointed
member.
member shall be a resident of a low-income, or, I'm sorry, the appointed member shall be a low-income resident of the city of Nashua.
Yes.
Okay, so that is the amendment. The appointed member shall be a low-income resident of the city of Nashua.
Okay, everybody happy with that amendment? Okay. Anything else on discussion on this proposed ordinance?
Oh, and if I may,
Sure.
the reference that you wanted used for qualifying as low income
Yeah,
As defined by HUD?
As defined by
by
HUD.
HUD.
that's probably
okay.
shorter than what we were here. Yeah.
Okay.
Just as defined by the United Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Okay.
Anyone have any other discussion? Anything else they want to discuss in this ordinance?
Okay. Do we need to vote on this amendment?
Yes, okay, yes. So, the amendment, we will take a vote on the amendment. Alderman Malisukolia, would you mind reading the amendment?
Yes, the amendment again is the appointed member shall be a low-income resident of the city of Nashua with low income defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
You can just change that to as defined by,
Actually, that's
Housing
what I
urban.
have here,
Okay.
as.
Okay, you've all heard the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. So the motion before us is to recommend final passage as amendment. Further discussion on that? The orientation session under section D. That has been in here, but has not been taking place for the most part. But I do like the idea of having a schedule ahead of time. I think this is really going to help us out, having input and support from the urban program, the community development department. Anyone have any questions or concerns about anything else? No? Okay, guess we're ready to vote. Motion before us is to recommend final passage of O-1744 as amended. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Thank you very much for being here and for your support
Thank you
and
for
for all your help and work on
Thanks.
this. It was tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, you too. Okay, general discussion. Alderman Lopez.
If we're trying to engage volunteers and people in city processes, we should definitely somehow put more emphasis on the actual electoral process, because it seems like people working on the polls can be paid to do that, and still somehow we don't get the word out that, hey, this is a job, you can do it, and get enough people to actually perform that role.
Oh, I agree. I mean, when you look at the candidate filings, there are a lot of holes in it. And I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who would say, hey, if I knew I was going to get paid, you know, even if it's a modest stipend to do that, I'm sure they'd step forward to do it.
I was referring to the workers at the polls the day of the election.
The workers,
think-
oh, I thought
I
you
th-
meant the people on the ballot running for.
I agree with that too. There was actually
Okay.
a constituent of mine who was trying about an hour before the time frame closed for him to submit his ballot, or his position, because he was willing to do the job but hadn't realized nobody else was going to do it.
Okay.
So he was like trying to get the signatures that he needed, trying to get around the city to collect it, and it looks like he didn't make the cutoff. And I don't know that we have a mechanism for saying, whoops, nobody applied, so we should continue to extend that. But what I was referring to was working at the poll. I think we could do a slightly better job of informing the public. We, not the city clerk, because they do put it out, they do let people know. I just think aldermen should make a point to explain to their constituents that, hey, if you're working at the poll, you're not volunteering for 12 hours of counting ballots. You're getting get compensated.
Okay. Good idea. Anything else? Any other discussion? Public comment? Seeing none. Remarks by Alderman? Alderman Karen.
Yes, motion to adjourn.
Oh, okay. Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned at 7:43 PM. Thank you all very much. That went well, I